Have you ever heard something so many times that you stop really listening to the words? Well, today we're looking at a single powerful verse written about 2,700 years ago. It's a prophecy from the book of Isaiah, and as you're about to see, it makes some pretty mind-blowing claims about a future king's identity.
For to us a child is born, to us a son is given. Yeah, you know these words, right? They're everywhere, especially around the holidays. But just listen, really listen to those titles again. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I mean, these are not small claims.
You've probably heard these words 1,000 times. But what if they're not just beautiful poetry? The sources we're digging into today argue that this text is a direct prophecy, and it identifies a future king as being divine, as God himself. So the real question is, does the text actually back up a claim that huge? Let's find out.
Okay, so first things first. Before we can even talk about what these names mean, we have to figure out who this prophecy is even about. How do we know this child, this son, is the one they were all waiting for, the Messiah of Israel?
While our source material makes it really clear that this verse doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's more like one thread in a giant, intricate tapestry. The argument is that when you start looking at the surrounding prophecies, a really consistent picture of a single messianic figure starts to emerge.
And you can see how these connections build on each other. For instance, Isaiah 11 talks about a righteous king coming from the line of David. Then you have Micah, who is writing around the same time, predicting a ruler from Bethlehem who will literally be their peace. Sounds a lot like Prince of Peace, right? And Zechariah talks about a king bringing peace to all nations, which matches the global scale we see in Isaiah 9. You see how it's all interconnected?
And get this isn't some new idea that people came up with centuries later. The sources point out that even ancient Jewish interpretations connected this passage to the Messiah. The Targum of Jonathan, which is an old Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible, straight up identifies this child as the Messiah. It's been part of the conversation for a very long time.
So, if we can establish that, yes, this prophecy is about the Messiah, then we have to face the core of the argument head on. These absolutely extraordinary names, what do they actually mean?
Let's look at that text one more time. Now, all of these titles are huge, but the sources we're looking at really zero in on two of them as being particularly, well, explosive: Mighty God and Everlasting Father.
So the first title is El Gibbor, which translates to Mighty God. Now, this isn't just some generic term for a powerful person. It's a very specific title, and where else Isaiah uses this exact phrase? Well, that turns out to be everything. Okay, now this is where it gets incredibly specific, so lean in for this. The sources stress that Isaiah isn't just making up new, fancy titles here. Just one chapter later, in Isaiah chapter 10, he uses the exact same Hebrew phrase, El Gibbor, to refer to Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the same pattern holds for the other titles. God is described as Wonderful in Counsel and is explicitly called Our Father. The argument here is that by using these very specific, reserved titles for the Messiah, Isaiah is making an unmistakable statement about who he is. Then we get to Abi Ad, or Everlasting Father. Now, the sources point out that a more literal translation is Father of Eternity. The interpretation presented isn't that this child is God the Father, like in the Trinity. Instead, it's that he is the creator or the author of time itself, a role that could only belong to a divine being.
So the whole point boils down to this. The argument hangs on how incredibly specific the language is. The prophet isn't just saying the Messiah will be godlike or a great leader. He's giving him the personal, specific names and titles that he, in the very same book, uses only for God Almighty. It's being presented not as a description of his future job, but a definition of his very being.
But wait a minute, there's a common counter-argument we have to address. Couldn't this prophecy just be about a really good king who was alive back then, someone like King Hezekiah? It's a fair question.
Okay, so the sources lay out the case for Hezekiah. On one hand, the verbs are in the past tense, which could point to a recent birth. And some phrases, like the seal of the Lord of Hosts, also show up in stories about God saving Hezekiah. But according to these sources, the case against Hezekiah is just much stronger. Why? Because Isaiah 9:7 says, "Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, from this time forth and forevermore." Hezekiah's reign, as good as it was, wasn't endless, it wasn't eternal. His kingdom eventually fell. The prophecy's scope just seems to completely dwarf Hezekiah's actual life and rule. So, after looking at all the connections, the meaning of the names, and even the main counter-argument, what's the big picture? What does this all add up to?
let's just boil it all down. First, the verse is established as being about the Messiah by linking it to a whole network of other prophecies. Second, this Messiah is given these incredible names, including Mighty God. Third, and this is the real kicker, these aren't generic titles. They are the specific names Isaiah uses only for God himself. And finally, other explanations like King Hezekiah just don't fit the forevermore and no end promises of the prophecy.
So here's the crucial takeaway from the sources we've looked at. Isaiah 9:6 is doing way more than just predicting the arrival of a great leader. It's making a profound theological statement. It's defining the very nature of this king, identifying him not just as a representative of God, but as God himself, arriving as a child.
And that leaves us with a pretty massive question, doesn't it? If a 2,700-year-old text really does describe the promised Messiah using the exclusive personal names of God, what does that even mean? What are the implications of that divine identity, not just for history books, but for you and me right now? It's a claim that really demands you stop and think about it.